the trick is finding someone who will also listen and take your, personal suggestion of this is what I'm finding and this is the homework I've done. And can't we just try it? And sometimes they say yes. And so you're like, but were those other times still valid? Like, whereas I still gaslit yesterday, but today you're appropriate. It can be really such a mind game.
I really feel like that's how it should work with medical professionals, is that it really should be a collaborative experience, because they have a lot of knowledge and expertise and things they can bring to the table. And they kind of hold the keys to the gate when it comes to a lot of the testing and prescriptions and a lot of these other things that you want to have access to in order to have this, elevated sense of wellness. It should be collaborative because it's still my body.
Welcome to the Wits and Weights podcast. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and this twice-a-week podcast is dedicated to helping you achieve physical self-mastery by getting stronger, optimizing your nutrition, and upgrading your body composition. We'll uncover science-backed strategies for movement, metabolism, muscle, and mindset with a skeptical eye on the fitness industry so you can look and feel your absolute best. Let's dive right in. Before we start the episode, a quick disclaimer. This episode may contain discussions of medical trauma, sexual assault, and gaslighting within the healthcare system. We'll be talking about experiences of having serious medical issues dismissed or misdiagnosed by doctors and the long-term impacts this has had on the well-being of our guests. If you're sensitive to these topics or feeling vulnerable, please listen with care or feel free to skip this episode. As always, if you're struggling with your physical or mental health, please reach out for support from a trusted friend, family member, or qualified professional. Wits and Weights community, welcome to another very special episode of the Wits and Weights podcast. Today, we'll be tackling a surprisingly common but extremely overlooked issue related to your health and fitness: the epidemic of medical gaslighting against women. Now, far too many women, many in my own life that I've heard from, have had their symptoms dismissed, their concerns minimized, and their intuition about their own bodies disregarded by the very professionals they turn to for help. This is what we mean by gaslighting, which is basically just not believing what someone says and maybe trying to convince them they're crazy or ignorant or uneducated or misinformed. And the consequences of this gaslighting can be profound, leading to delayed diagnoses, worsening health, and a very deep erosion of trust in the medical system and doctors in general. So today, I'm very excited to have invited on two women from our community, Elizabeth and Brienne, who have firsthand experience with medical gaslighting and will share their stories. Liz is a medical professional herself. She's going to share her journey of fighting for a hypothyroidism diagnosis at a young age when doctors didn't believe it was possible. I've heard that before. And Brie will detail her decade-long battle with mysterious symptoms before finally getting to the root of her hormone issues. So through these experiences, we'll examine the, I'll say, insidious, disturbing, and unbelievable, very unbelievable often, ways that gaslighting can manifest in healthcare, the systemic biases that allow it to persist, and the toll it takes on women's physical and emotional well-being. But it's not all negative. We're going to talk about the incredible resilience, the self-advocacy of women like Liz and Brie, who fought and fought and fought for the care they deserved. So if you've ever had a doctor make you doubt your own reality, if you've ever been made to feel like your pain wasn't real or your concerns weren't valid, this episode is for you. I am not a healthcare provider, but as a nutrition coach, I want everyone listening to have complete agency and advocacy over their health. And I figured inviting a couple amazing women on to do it would be a better way to put that across than me saying it. And if you're listening and you are a healthcare provider, we hope this conversation will be a call to action to ensure you're listening to, hearing, and validating what your patients are telling you. It's time for women to be heard, believed, and properly cared for the way we all want to be. Now, let's meet and hear the women of the hour, Liz and Brie. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So I want to start off on a light note. Let's start with you, Liz. No particular order. I just want to know how you found our community and, why you're here today.
So I love podcasts. I have a wide plethora of podcasts that I listen to, and I was looking for something that would help me level up my nutrition and, weight training and different information. And I love the evidence-based perspective. I'm sort of a dork in that region. And so I want the real rationale behind things. And so I happened upon your podcast, and yeah, no looking back now.
I love it. Yeah. And I seem to attract, curious people like you who just are trying to figure it out. And cut through all the noise out there, which is just, there's a lot of it, right? And yeah, dork, that appeals to me too. Dork, nerd, geek, I'll put me in those categories.
I'm okay with it.
Cool. And same question to you, Brie. How did you find our community?
I'm glad to know I'm in nerd territory. That's my jam. Like all good podcast love stories, I found your podcast through a podcast.
Of course.
You were a guest on Karen Martell's podcast, which is called The Hormone Solution now. It used to be called something else. And I had found her podcast through searching for answers on a myriad of health issues that I wasn't getting answers to in the way that I had hoped. And so went looking for my own information, came across hers, and she had gone kind of down the rabbit hole on a lot of her episodes, and then came across one where she had you on. And immediately it kind of clicked for me, because the idea of being evidence-based, not evidence-bound, that's 100% my jam and where I like to live. I'm a research and data nerd. So that was very intriguing to me. And I knew that she was going on to your podcast as well. So I kind of followed my way on over there, and very quickly found like this was a good community. This was something that I could connect to. It felt very, very welcoming to be in a space that was based off of research and data and not bound to the party line, so to speak, of the fitness and health world.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, Karen's great too, by the way. And I know a lot of people we found each other, or people found each other through that show. So we hooked up again recently. And then you and I had a call. It was a while back. That was probably like early 2023, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I want to say it was like summer or fall of 2023. Yeah,
okay,
lots changed since then.
Okay, yeah, no, time. I can't keep track of time. Okay, cool. So now that everyone's met you, we're going to get into a little bit of the gaslighting stuff and what it looks like, because I'm sure people are listening. Some folks are very experienced with what this means, whether it's women or men supporting women. Others may be like, what is this? Because when we brought up the topic, I know I had a few people say, what are you talking about? What do you mean by gaslighting? And I think it happens to a lot of people, even when they don't have a term for it. So let's again start with Liz, your experience, right? Can you just share an overview of this experience with hypothyroidism, maybe how the doctors didn't initially believe it could be happening at your age, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I was about 8 years old when I suddenly gained 20 pounds in the span of a year, which if you don't know pediatrics or kids, that's a lot of weight. That'd probably be a lot of weight even for an adult in a year. I also had some other symptoms. I had thinning hair, had a lot of cold sensitivity. I had dry hands that were so dry they would crack and bleed. And I was eating and playing the same amount as my sister, who was 3 years older, and she had none of the symptoms that I did. And so fortunate for me, my mom is a nurse, and she actually also has Hashimoto's hypothyroiditis. And she took me to the provider. I was, still like playing and running and trying to sort of keep up and cope, but she could see that I was struggling too. And so she had her own suspicions. While it was unusual that at 8 you would have hypothyroidism, she encouraged the doctor to administer a blood test to see, could that be the answer? And they were very adamant that it was more likely that I was doing something else outside of what she was telling them. Could I be hiding candy? Could I be, doing something else that would be causing this weight gain? And she was like, there's no way, I know my kid. So, great to have a wonderful advocate on my side. And of course, the nurse helps. Lo and behold, they finally did do some blood tests, and they found my TSH was over 100, which is pretty staggering. And so, fortunate enough that you just keep pegging them with questions, and I need an answer, and being very persistent helped get that diagnosis at that time.
Now, when I hear stories like this, people shake their head. I shake my head every day when I hear stuff like, what is it that, you're 8, right? So there's a certain trajectory when you're a kid. I have kids who are now 10 and 12, and yeah, there's the charts, right? The weight gain charts and stuff like that. So first question is, were you far off on that chart in terms of like an outlier, or was it somewhat within the range potentially?
I was definitely an outlier on the growth chart for weight. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how did so without your mom having advocated for you, do you recall this? Does she tell you the stories about, did the doctors say this was an issue or bring it up as a concern in the first place?
I think that it was sort of like, oh, your daughter's overweight and move on, versus, is there anything else going on that could be a problem? And it's funny because I think back to about, my hands were cracking and bleeding and they gave me lotion for it. They prescribed lotion for it. Right. Exactly. The Band-Aid for the problem when, I continue to say that's really not helping. It's not doing anything. Like, what else could it be? So definitely there was a lot of ignoring all the signs that sort of you have to bring them together to get the clinical picture of me as a patient at 8.
Yeah. And ask questions too, because I could imagine, like, I've had clients who will, say X is happening. And I'm thinking, okay, the root cause could be, A, B, or C, but let me ask questions at least to get the data. Did the doctor ask questions, or was it just boom, like, check the box, let's move on?
Yeah, I recall a lot of box checking, not really willing to get in depth on the answers. And I think, that's a part of a larger discussion about like medical care in general. And I think that's why we find a lot of medical gaslighting, that do we even have the time as providers to stop and ask questions? Is that built into their day? No. So they're trying to, survive. And I think that we as patients are the victims of that sometimes.
Yeah, you make a great point that doctors are a product of a system, right? And the system may be the root cause, but if that system exists, we need to be aware of it to know what the consequences for us, and maybe not rely so much on what we think their doctors can and will do, and maybe just assume it's not going to happen, sadly, right? Because that's the state we're in. What was the impact of finally getting the diagnosis then? You got the appropriate diagnosis. They finally did the blood work, which I'm curious if this kind of blood work should just be done on a regular basis, but I understand you don't want to like over test for things. What was the impact from that point? Like, just tell us about that.
Staggering. So, the difference in like feeling sluggish and tired and cold and, having no appetite, even when you want to go run and play and do all of those things, it was a big difference for me as a child at 8. And it has been an interesting trajectory over the last 30 something or 20 something years, trying to continue to stay well, because hypothyroidism can be such a roller coaster. So I feel like it sort of set me on a path very early to, be in tune with my body and understand what feels good and what feels not good for me, and really being able to just kind of keep getting better along the way it's made all the difference.
Awesome. Okay, I want to turn to Bree's story and then kind of go back and forth. I know we're juggling both of you here with the two stories, but what will be interesting to see is the similarities, and then also when I come back to you, Liz, we'll probably get into later on, like, how can the listener benefit specifically with understanding things like hypothyroidism, which is quite common, and maybe even Hashimoto's, since you said your mom had that, and we can get into that. So, Bree, you mentioned that you had like almost a decade of gaslighting. Share with us the symptoms you had, how the doctors responded, things like that.
Well, for starters, I have Hashi's also. So there's definitely going to be a lot of overlap. And it kind of actually ends up playing into a lot of the gaslighting that I experienced. It took a long time. I come from a long genetic line of Hashimoto's, but was not acknowledged as anything autoimmune for a really, really long time. And then once it finally did, that actually ended up kind of being the bucket that a lot of stuff got poured into with a lot of the medical professionals that I was interacting with. It was like, oh, well, it's probably just Hashimoto's. It's probably just that. And it really delayed getting help. So for context, I don't want to go into all of the details of the other side of this. I'm glad you have a disclaimer up front, but there was some trauma almost 10 years ago that my family and I went through where we were involved in a live shooting event that I don't need to get into the details on, but we were very rapidly moved out of the place that we were in. We were kind of put into a safe zone where we have lived for the last almost 10 years now. And very rapidly after that happened, the kind of trauma that I experienced just flipped my health on its head. And I had already been managing Hashimoto's, and at that point, I'd already been diagnosed celiac as well. So I had gone gluten-free. Like, I was doing a lot of the things. I had been feeling a lot better for a while at that point. And then this event happens and everything flipped upside down. And within 6 months, I had gained 85 pounds. And again, it just gets chalked up to, it's your Hashi's. Like, obviously this has gotten out of control, and you must be depressed. And so you're probably just eating more than you realize, and you're probably not moving as much as you should be. And it really just always got chalked into that. And then very rapidly, then it also became, well, if you lost weight, you'd probably feel better, which is like the nonstop that I got from medical professionals over and over and over and over again. Even my thyroid specialist that I was seeing for the Hashimoto's was like, well, have you tried maybe doing a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that? And
just eat more, eat less, move more. Come on.
Exactly. I mean, doesn't it always just come down to that? Like, it's just that easy. Of course. And it really felt like I was constantly being dismissed. And when, like you were saying, Liz, I feel like when you have some of these kinds of chronic illnesses, especially an autoimmune disorder, you get really in tune with your own body and you kind of know when something's off, when something's wrong. And when you've had to advocate for your own health for long enough, you pay a lot of attention to those kinds of things. And the number of times that I would sit in front of, a primary care physician or my thyroid specialist or you name it, kind of medical professional, or even like fitness trainers or whatever, and be told, well, it's probably like, are you tracking what you're eating? Have you paid attention to, like, maybe you need to cut carbs a little bit more? And, like, it was always those kinds of responses, and it was just chalked up to these other things. Maybe we'll play a little bit with your medication, but, this really is probably that you aren't doing what you should be doing. And it just was very dismissive. And I knew something else was wrong. I knew something had snapped or broken somewhere in that process, because you don't just gain 85 pounds in 6 months for no reason, no like medical tracking reason. Like there's something there. There's something there.
It's
that's
massive, right? Yeah. Most people gain all their weight in the holidays from obvious things. Yeah.
And the effort it would take to gain 85 pounds in the holidays, like that would be remarkable. Right. That would be like, somebody should get a trophy if they were capable of that, because it's just really not something that happens that easily. So it was very dismissive for years and years and years. And I changed healthcare providers, and I even changed insurance at one point. And I felt like I was chasing. And I had learned early on with the Hashimoto's experience that I really did have to advocate for my own health, but was in a not awesome headspace after all of those events had taken place. And so advocacy becomes very, very difficult when you're in that kind of a state anyway. And I had a lot of social anxiety that was going on and a lot of other things that had kind of kicked up in that trauma situation that made it very difficult to do the work to advocate for myself, because I didn't feel like confronting physicians or other healthcare professionals to try to fight for what I felt like I needed. I just knew that they weren't giving me what I needed. And a lot of that just, was kind of shut down, and was like, well, fine, I'm just going to conveniently cancel that appointment. And then I'll see if I can make one with another person and see what they get. And then it would be the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it really wasn't until not long before I found your podcast. And a lot of it was related to Karen's podcast, but some of the other literature that I'd come across, again, data and research person. So I was the person in the pandemic who had like the stack of medical journals on the bedside table, just for funsies. So I don't mind reading through a lot of that stuff or getting into the nitty gritty. And it just, the consistency that I was coming across of like, there's something here with the adrenals, there's something here with the hormones. And when I finally got to that answer, I had already done so much. I'm not afraid of the hard work. So when it was things like, well, maybe your sleep is a problem, it was like, cool, I will get a sleep coach. I will retrain myself on how to sleep properly, because I wasn't getting enough sleep and didn't have a great understanding of how much sleep I actually needed. So I did that, and that didn't fix anything. And then was like, well, maybe it's adrenals. Maybe my stress is an issue, because I got told that one a lot by doctors. You need to stress a little less.
Stop stressing.
Right. It's like when you're really upset and somebody says, calm down, because that always works. When
don't
somebody
be depressed. Don't be anxious. It's on.
Have you thought happier thoughts? Yeah, it was in that vein. And so I did some stuff that was actually very helpful with stress. And we saw the reaction with the adrenal testing that I was getting done when I had done some training in transcendental meditation. And I actually had done some hypnotherapy. I mean, like, I was literally willing to try anything. I had long since gone past pharmaceutical options. I was like, you name it, I'm trying it. Let's just see if it works. And I did see good results with like cortisol and things like that when I did that, but it still didn't fix the issue. So then I got medically cleared to start exercising again, which I had been a little bit restricted on. And, I still don't do chronic cardio because that's not great for my system at all, but started adding in, resistance training, and I was in the pool, and I was doing reformer Pilates, and I was literally like 6 days a week, and nothing was changing. And so looked into gut health, and it was like, all right. And I tested positive for SIBO. So let's do treatment for that. So I did treatment for that. And we got to where I was testing negative on it. Nothing was changing. So I felt like I went round and round and round and round and round. And every time that I thought I found an answer, it wasn't an answer until it finally was like, well, what about hormones? And I got tested for them, and I had no detectable levels of estrogen or progesterone in my system. And my testosterone was at a 9, which is pretty low. So it was like bells all went off, where it's like, this is it. This is it. This is finally like, this has got to be it. This interacts with all of these same areas that I've been trying to address. And when I took it to my doctor, when those results came back, and I was like, all right, let's sit down. I've done my homework. I've done my research. I looked into this thing. I looked into this thing. Let's talk about how we're going to address this. And she stopped me mid-sentence and said, I'm very upset that you went and did that. I was like, that I went and did what? She's like, you went in and you looked at other medical information and that you looked at other doctors' recommendations on this. I'm very upset. This is my area of expertise, and I'm really upset that you did that. And I was like flabbergasted because I had worked with this doctor for years and did not see that coming at all. Shut down the entire conversation. And when I asked if I could retest in a month and maybe we'll just come back to it then, she said, I'm never testing your hormones again. This is not the issue. This is not a problem. We're not going to be talking about this again, and wanted to go back to talking about thyroid issues instead. And it was devastating.
I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to start because, women in my life, very close to me, male and female doctors, I've heard stuff similar to that where they'll say, well, you're too young, or no, it's not the hormones, it's something else. But you actually got tested, had abysmally low numbers, obviously, and you had tried everything else. And here is the sanctimony, the arrogance, right, of this doctor. Like I'm feeling it, right, from this doctor.
Well, and so much of that you get where it's like, you tell like, no, I've done this. And I had been tracking everything for so long. And like, I can show it to them. But if it's like, but did you really? It's like, no, I really, really did. I've been tracking my sleep for 7 years. I've been tracking my food for 4.5. I've been like I've got all of this on paper in writing, and I'm that person. So like, it's all there, and to have it just utterly dismissed, and then to have it in test results. I have those test results in my, my chart system and all of that. Like, it's there, it's in black and white, and to have it just dismissed, to be told, no, we're not even going to talk about this. This is a non-issue. I was 38 years old at the time, and it was like, your hormones are not a problem. We're not even going to talk about it. It's like, now what?
Yeah. And honestly, and maybe Liz can chime in here as a medical professional, but are there books that, you go through training and it's basically root cause decision tree type books? And I asked this because one time when I was in my rheumatologist's office, because I have a minor connective tissue autoimmune thing myself, I was just snooping through their stuff, and there was a big book there, and I actually looked up like my condition, and it was like, if this, do this, if this, do this, if this, do this. And I was like, wait a minute. Is that what they're doing? Like, Liz, I'm just curious. Chime in on that.
Yeah, there are some subspecialty texts like that kind of give you guidelines as far as treatment. So yeah, it can be kind of prescriptive like that, but oftentimes there's some anecdotal things that happen too. Like, what did the person who taught you, teach you about this? And so that's a lot of the experiential learning of healthcare too. But yes, some of it is very simple and straightforward. And if this, then do that. And so it always amazes me when providers kind of can't help take that next step. That really we're coming to them with, I have A plus B equals C. I have A, help me get B, and then it'll equal C, right? Sometimes it can be that simple, but.
Yeah. And this doctor of yours, Brie, too, just saying that, like, how dare you get tested elsewhere? Like, I'm not sure where that comes from. I wonder how many doctors are like that. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories. So.
Well, and what's wild is she was actually the one who ordered the first tests when I had requested them, and then wouldn't do them again. So all further testing after that, I've had to get done myself. I had them redone a month later, because of course the gaslighting part of the kind of insidious part of it is that it really starts to make you doubt yourself. And even though that I've done this and I live in this body every day, and I've had to advocate for my health, and I've had to kind of pay a lot of attention to how I'm feeling and what works and what doesn't for a very long time. And to have that reaction and to know something is not right, but then to immediately doubt lived in my own body experience. And if that was real because of this reaction from, a professional, that was like, I finally had to then go out of pocket to go get retested a month later. Cause I was like, well, maybe there was something wrong with the test. Maybe I am missing something. I'm not a doctor. So, maybe I'm wrong here. And they came back exactly the same a month later.
Yeah.
So it was confirmed, but I had to go do that out of pocket because she would not talk about it ever again.
Right. And I understand a lot of hormone treatment and testing does have to be done out of pocket. I've experienced that as well. And you talked a couple times now about the friction we have against even self-advocacy, right? The friction, like, first of all, if you're not in the right headspace and you're trying to trust these professionals. Secondly, just the system itself and the healthcare and the financials, it goes on. And probably third, I mean, there's a whole long list of like, because we are not the experts, we're questioning how much should we internet doctor ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I'm coming to find, talking to you here and others, that we should doctor the hell out of ourselves. Like, basically just assume doctors know nothing, but then collaborate and correlate, against
Mhm.
stuff they know.
The most value that I got from this was the fact that I had someone that I could talk to about anything and that there was going to be no judgment. It was just, well, here are your goals. Here's the best way that you're going to achieve it. And then let's work together to help you feel inspired and motivated to do that. And there's a lot of people out there trying to be coaches, and not all of them have done the work. And also just be a genuine person that is positive and coming from the heart in terms of wanting to help. And Philip really embodied all of those qualities. I would recommend him to just about anyone that's looking to achieve goals in that realm of their nutrition and building new habits.
I know we had our chat, and then I know you found Karen. Like, where was this? Was there a spark somewhere specifically with the hormones that got you on that track that people listening can say, okay, maybe I can try that?
I mean, I was noticing the correlation between some of these because I was already deep diving on podcasts and books and a lot of different opportunities to learn more about what is it that I'm experiencing and how does that align with like what this could potentially be. Because it wasn't just adrenals. It wasn't just an issue of cortisol. It was not just an issue of sleep. It wasn't just an issue of what I was eating and how much I was working out. And so in that process of diving into what could the answer be, when you start hearing things in the hormone world about a lot of symptoms that can sound a little bit more like the thyroid issues, where you've got brain fog and you've got trouble sleeping and you've got, belly fat. And I mean, everybody loves to talk about menobelly and all of that stuff. You start to see some correlations where it's like, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. So maybe let's just find out, maybe let's test. And it was a very like light intro to when I went to that doctor the first time. And like, I don't know, I'm curious. And I'm, getting closer to 40 and there's already fertility issues when you have autoimmune thyroid disorder. And I've got 2 kids and I wasn't looking to add to that number, but my sister had she'd had a miscarriage and lost a baby late term. And so it was just kind of top of mind of like, hey, let's just see where things are at. And I'd asked, and I'd gotten that testing when it came back as not detectable. It was like, okay, so this is clearly a problem. So treatment probably would make a really big difference. And to then be immediately rejected on being able to go further on treatment. It was the last time I had an appointment with that doctor, but I had to find other care because I didn't have the option. It's very expensive. I didn't have the option of paying out of pocket for full hormone treatment. As it is, even through insurance, I still go through a compound pharmacy for the treatments that I use, and it's still really expensive. And I think it's really unfortunate that I think that that's probably a pretty big barrier for treatment for a lot of people, because it has been a night and day experience once I started to get on actual treatment for all 3 hormones that I'm having replaced.
Got it. Yeah. And I've heard, you would think there's a simple argument that can be made that if it's so profound for women, for lots of women who probably have hormone imbalances, why doesn't insurance cover it? But then I think the cynical and maybe realistic answer is that there's more money in the pharmaceuticals, perhaps for treating sickness. I don't know, or it's just the system set up that way, right? Like, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but let's go to, I'm skeptical of everything. So that's how it works. Let's go back to Liz. Like, do you have any thoughts on anything we just said first? And then before I go to another question?
So as a medical professional, my question is always, if you're going to run a test, it should impact what you're going to do next, right? It should have some sort of impact on the treatment options you're exploring. Otherwise, why are you doing the test if it's not going to inform the next step for the patient? So if you ever encounter that, I would say the best advice I have is run from that provider, because, why are you charging my insurance for a test that means nothing to you, that you don't value the data from? Like, that's a very big red flag to me. And I know we're probably going to talk about that, but you know, incredible amount of homework that you do. And I think reading studies on a Friday night is a very exciting Friday night. So, um,
Yeah, you either add that to stress relief or to sleep hack. Like one or the other.
We're here, one or the other, right? So I think an incredible job that Bree did just advocating for herself and yeah, it's so unfortunate that we are all experiencing this.
What so I wonder if a doctor asks. So I've heard doctors who won't even get the tests, order the test because you're 38 or whatever, like as if that's there's some magic number you have to get to, like 50 or whatever. That's one thing that comes to mind. But the other is, you're right. If she had the test, was she hoping that the numbers would be good enough that she could just tell you, okay, let's move on to the next thing? I'm just speculating if that was what it was. You mentioned red flags, Liz. So, I mean, how about you? What were some other red flags on the way? And again, I know we're talking about when you were young specifically, or was there another situation later on as well, more recently?
Yeah, I like I said, it's been the roller coaster of healthcare. And I think we've sort of touched on that with Hashimoto's especially. But I have a primary care provider that I really value and I appreciate. And she's done a phenomenal job of, letting me participate in care and really interact with me. And so recently I went to her office and, again, starting to feel some symptoms again. Can we get a blood test? It's been a little bit. And those results were sort of borderline, which for someone with Hashimoto's, it's like, okay, great. What does that mean? What do we do with that? But having symptoms, right? Symptoms should really drive sort of what are we going to do for you? And so she had also been having this conversation with me about, oh, you're starting to sort of edge towards overweight. Your BMI is escalating. We really need to be mindful about those things. And you really need to work harder to lose weight. And I said, here's all the things I'm doing. What exactly different would you have me do? And she was like, oh, no, you're doing great. Keep on the same path. So when this TSH came up, I said, so it's borderline and you tell me I'm gaining weight. Why wouldn't we tweak my medication? She was like, oh, sure, let's do that. So it was sort of this, like, it's gaslighting. And then it's also, the trick is finding someone who will also listen and take your personal suggestion of this is what I'm finding and this is the homework I've done and can't we just try it? And sometimes they say yes. And so you're like, but were those other times still valid? Like, whereas I still gaslit yesterday, but today you're appropriate. It can be really such a mind game. And so for me and other medical experiences that I've had, and I think, the OBGYN is another one for a lot of women where we get gaslighting. And belittling language to me is a lot of what I see. I see it in peers at the hospital that I work with. I see it, in my own medical care. That is it just this, or could it be, this belittling language that sort of diminishes your experience? Like Bree was saying, it makes you second guess your own lived experience. That's a big one for me. And I think also when providers act frustrated and angry, that's a big red flag to me. My care, my lived experience, what I feel well should never anger a provider. And that to me is a huge red flag of, if me needing something is going to interact with, how you're going to interact with me, then I don't want that provider to be caring for me and giving them that time and that, to be frank, give them my money either.
Yeah. So so much what you say, I've seen it firsthand with people, and you're right that it can be even worse when it almost seems like the doctor's going along with you. Like you said, I think what you were saying is that your current doctor is kind of maybe better than the average, but maybe not quite where you wish they were, because she waited for you to take action and mention what you wanted to do. And she's like, yeah, okay, fine. Almost patronizingly, right?
Yeah.
Belittling language. Okay. And then, when providers are frustrated and angry, I mean, I don't know. As a nutrition coach, like, I just want to be a detective and figure it out. And if I don't know, let's figure it out. So I don't understand where that attitude comes from in the medical industry. Do you see it more often than not? And is it because of the training? Is it because of medical school? Like, do you know where that comes from?
I think there are a lot of providers that go out into the world and get, medical training and knowledge because they want to help people and they do have that mindset. But I think there is a certain point where ego does come into play. And when they don't know the answer and they can't help and they can't fix, which is all they've been, trained and taught to do, that sometimes it can be a threat to their ego. And so I think there are wonderful providers out there. And I think there are providers that are absolutely threatened by not having the answer. And unfortunately, I think that can come into play.
I love your positivity. I mean, I like that you keep coming back to, hey, there are going to be good apples out there. I agree. But it doesn't necessarily excuse how prevalent bad actors are when you compare it to maybe other industries or something. And I'm not putting that on you at all. Oh man, something came to mind when you said that. And what was it? I don't know. Let's keep going here. Brie, did you want to add anything? Because I can definitely get into more specific questions as we go forward.
I fully agree with everything you're saying, Liz. I think that those are a lot of the really big red flags, that kind of being dismissed, to being angry, being resistant to a collaborative experience. And I really feel like that's how it should work with medical professionals, is that it really should be a collaborative experience, because they have a lot of knowledge and expertise and things they can bring to the table. And they kind of hold the keys to the gate when it comes to a lot of the testing and prescriptions and a lot of these other things that you want to have access to in order to have this, elevated sense of wellness. It should be collaborative, because it's still my body. It's still my life. It's still all the things that I have to live through and go through on a daily basis. And so when you don't have a collaborative healthcare professional that you're working with, that should really be a flag right there. Ego is certainly a huge flag too. I feel like when you find a physician, whatever their specialty, whatever their capacity in the medical field, when you find one that is collaborative, when you find one that is open, that encourages you to do, I feel like it's more of a green flag, but when they encourage you to do a lot of your own research and provide you with resources that you can dive deeper on, they are worth their weight in gold. Like, you hold on to them as much as you can, because I do feel like they are unfortunately quite rare. And when you don't have that collaborative spirit, that's a huge red flag.
That's a really good one for listeners to take home. A couple things come to mind, Brie and Liz, was first, it sounds ironic that doctors pretty much get paid whether they fix your issue or not, right? And that almost seems ironic, because then, well, maybe it isn't. Maybe it is because of that. They just want to move to the next thing. Whereas somebody who's incentivized to do that, to actually address the issue, would put more into it. But then, Brie, your comment about if someone is open to you doing the research, right? I've had personal experience with this. Two very different GI doctors. One who I had a minor issue. My voice was getting hoarse, which as a podcaster was a nightmare. My voice was getting hoarse, and I had been taking this steroid inhaler thing for an esophageal thing, and I Googled it. And it said steroid induced hoarseness. I said, oh, okay, let me stop taking it, and it went away. And I went back on. It came back and went up. So I told the doctor, I did this 3 times. It went away. Oh no, that's not a thing. That doesn't exist. Two different doctors, actually, a GI doctor and a what do you call it? Ear, nose, and throat. And he said, no, it's a thing. Like I did it. Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's fine. You could. Yeah. And then I had to say, like, can we do a different steroid or a different option? Sure, we can. It's the same thing that Liz talked about.
Yeah.
Insane. And then there was another doctor. I wish I still had him. He was my primary in the old town I used to live in, who taught students. And, he was older. So you would think a lot of times the old school doctors are kind of like stuck in their ways. And he was always, I was bringing in papers and stuff. And he's like, yeah, that's great. I heard about it. It just came out last week. I think we should try that. Like, let's do that, So for those listening, like, these are good green and red flags to look for. So thank you for bringing all those up. And then I guess, if someone feels that they're experiencing gaslighting right now, if they're listening to this and saying, okay, I recognize those signs, those flags, like, what's the first bit of advice, 1 or 2 things they might do to take action today and move in the right direction? Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in on certainly one of these more recent experiences with this, the hormone situation. It was when that happened, when I got shut down and dismissed, and this is a full stop, we're not moving any further. That to me is like, I'm done. Okay. And I remember having and it's funny because Liz, you talked about the OBGYN field and how this happens so much there too. I feel like this happens a lot to women who are pregnant and are, especially when you get closer to labor and delivery, you get a lot of this. And I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine she was just past, like a day past the 40-week mark. And her doctor was really, really pushing on you were just going to have to induce because my favorite phrase, you're a geriatric pregnancy. So we have to induce you. And having a conversation with her of they're not going to show up to your house with an ambulance and force you in it. You can just say no. You don't have to do that. And I feel like every now and then I have to remind myself the same thing is true for my own health and the doctors I'm working with. I don't have to stay with them. I don't have to keep working with them. I don't have to take their advice. I don't have to take the medication. It's like you're talking about going on and off to kind of test and learn on your own with this like steroid inhaler. You don't have to just do what they say. They don't get to make all the decisions and own your life. You can walk away. And so if you're experiencing some of this, cancel the appointment, find a new doctor. You can you don't owe an explanation, nothing. You can just move on. And you don't have to confront if you don't want to. If you feel like it, more power to you. I'm not a terribly confrontational person. I get hot and bothered if I have to do that. So I prefer not to. And I'm totally fine just being like, okay, then I'm now done. And I will cancel the next appointment. And I will say, thank you for your time. And I will leave. And I just won't come back again. And I'll find somebody else.
I think those are great points, Brie. And I think just one other thing that I would really add to that is to sort of recap the conversation and rephrase it and send it back to them and say, like, am I understanding this correctly? So for Brie's example, you got this hormone testing done. My estrogen and my progesterone were completely nil. And you're saying now that we should not treat that. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly? Can you help me understand why? Sometimes I think it definitely puts the burden on the patient, right? That's not fair that we have to then argue for our healthcare and say, go above and beyond to keep arguing for what we think is right. And we know to be right for ourselves. But I think sometimes it does sort of gut check them to say, oh, wait, that actually doesn't make sense. Now that you've said it back, maybe I can come up with something else. Or I think also saying, well, this is one consult that I'm doing, and I'm looking for other providers who would also be experts in this field. So I'm going to take your recommendation of doing nothing, and I'll go see what another provider has to say. Because I think it's very transparent to say, that's not an option for me. Doing nothing is not going to help me be well. And that's my goal. That's why I'm here. So, I think you can be transparent. You don't have to be, I don't like to be confrontational either, but I think, sticking up for yourself is it's hard. And sometimes I just feel like we have to say something.
Yeah. You're a pro at this. I love the wording. Am I understanding this correctly? Are you saying this? Is that correct? I mean, just that's it, right? Because then if they're like, yeah, why are you telling me if my hormones have dropped to nothing, I'm doing nothing? Is that what you're saying? We just do nothing? And why? Yeah. Right?
And I feel like I advocate for patients all the time in the hospital. So I feel like I've gotten really good at saying, okay, this is the result. You're telling me that's really what you want to do. And so sometimes it does jar them into that, oh, I should do something about that.
Right. And for the listener, Liz being an advanced practice nurse, I don't know. I don't know if this is it's just a perception, but it seems like nurses, PAs, like anybody other than doctors for some reason seem to care more just on average. I don't know if that's what you've experienced in the field.
I feel like as a nurse, our worldview is a little bit more holistic. We care about the whole person, not just maybe the data set in front of us, but what does that also mean in the grander scheme of that patient? And I feel like being a nurse, you have to advocate for your patient. That's one of the best and hardest parts of being a nurse. So I definitely think that a lot of people get into that profession to help people. And it's a lot easier to start as a nurse or a PA than it is as a doctor too. So it helps remove those barriers. And I think that's part of why I like so many of those providers when I seek out care too.
Yeah, that's true. And then that leads me to thinking, okay, if people are looking for another provider today, we have a lot of resources, right? Even word of mouth on Facebook, like, hey, I'm looking for a doctor who works with people who train with barbells, like who's a lifter himself or something, where is that? And then people will chime in, although I did that once. And then somebody else said, well, he's not a doctor because he's a PA. And I'm like, oh, I think I do want to see this guy, because it's this elitism around the letters sometimes.
Okay.
What do you guys think about holistic and functional doctors? Because especially in the hormone world, it almost seems like that's one of the only ways to get somebody who wants to solve the problem with you. What do you guys think about that? Maybe Brie or Liz?
I'll jump in. Yeah. I grew up in a home that was very respectful of the medical professional and like medical professionals in general. And that's a good thing and a bad thing sometimes. I think it's part of why especially when I was first trying to get a lot of the treatment after the shooting had happened, and there was a lot of other issues that had kicked up with that. And I went the traditional methods and, had the anti-anxiety medication and had depression medication and had all of these other things that were just like the very traditional route and weren't working. And I had a conversation with a good friend who had kind of like sat me down and had a real heart-to-heart conversation of like, look, sometimes those things work for the majority of people. And sometimes you aren't the majority of people. And sometimes you need to go move outside of the traditional accepted paths and find another option. And maybe you'll find something that works for you. And I felt like that kind of unshackled me in a lot of ways, which is how I ended up going to other pathways, things I probably honestly never would have considered before. And then they worked. They were really helpful. And it was like, oh, there's an entire other world out here. And this is part of why I was so attracted to a lot of the stuff that you say, Phil. Like, I still care about, there has to be data and research. One of my absolute favorite phrases, like literally going to probably buy the t-shirt that comes from a different podcaster. He constantly says it in his podcast where he says, ooh, I'm going to have to say this correctly. Think critically, Google competently.
Sure. I love that.
Like, that's like a mantra that I can like now live by, to think critically and Google competently, because I'm not afraid to step out of the lane now. I've worked with functional medical doctors. I've worked with advice given from medical professionals, but I'm not directly their patient, or it's because they've written books or stuff about it because they aren't getting access in the mainstream spaces. And just having conversations with people who maybe have gone through it before and say, look, I don't know, this one worked for me. Why don't you try it? And allowing yourself to kind of experiment on your own self when you're not getting the help with the traditional routes anyway. Opening all of that up was really, really huge for me. And it's what moved the needle. And it's what eventually got me to a completely different side of health in my own life. I mean, when I finally got hormone treatment, I didn't start hormone therapy until March of last year. So we're coming up on a year. And it took a little while to kind of dial in those dosages of what I, get it all working and clicking on all the things that my body needed. And like almost as soon as we got it nailed in by June of last year, not that it was all about weight, because it was mostly about how I felt, but that 85-pound weight gain that had been stuck with me for 9 years, all of that has been gone since by December, like literally like 6 months on, 6 months off.
Yeah.
I didn't have to change any of the other
lifestyle. It was already dialed in. Yeah.
All the other stuff was I was already doing all the other things anyway. It was the good part about, I guess, doing that for no reward. But getting to the other side of that, where it's like, oh, wait, maybe if you do go out of the lane a little bit, there's something to that, and being open to it, still, thinking critically, Googling competently, but you can find other options that'll work, that'll actually mean something, do something, shift something. And you don't have to be stuck to the traditional paths.
Love it. I'm glad I asked that, because I think people are wondering about that. Does it have to be a traditional doctor? Definitely not. So Liz, do you want to add to that?
I want that phrase cross-stitched on something is really what I want to say. But I think there's so much value in complementary and alternative medicine. I think there's, it would be foolish to just think that, medicine prescriptions are the only way to be healed and to be well and to be healthy. And so I think acupuncture and chiropractic medicine and vitamins and supplements and, healthy lifestyles and sunshine and grounding and putting your feet in the dirt. Like, there's so many different ways that wellness can be enhanced. And I think if you can use all of it, I think it can just only make you better and often more well.
You know what you made me think of here is that, like, if we had a pie chart, traditional healthcare would be this tiny slice, because even what we do, even talking about lifestyle, just lifting weights and caring about your nutrition, kind of puts you in a minority these days, but it is a form of healthcare. And in fact, you've heard the criticisms of healthcare versus sick care, right? And you can almost like put traditional medicine to that sick care slice, and then all the other things are what we try to do on our own toward health care, although there's a time and place for medication and whatnot. Cool. All right. So we're going to close here soon. What I really want to get to the root of is, why did you think it was important to share your story today? Because I reached out in our community and I brought up the topic, and you guys raised your hand and you were courageous enough to come on here. And, everybody's nervous about going on a podcast and all that. Why was it important for you to be here? Let's start with Liz and then Brie.
I think we are the number one person who can take care of us. And it's so crucially important to advocate for ourselves and to really speak up and get the things that we need and reach out to the next resource if we're not getting it. So, so many things that I've learned as both a nurse and as like a human being in the world have been from hearing someone else's experience and going, oh, that sounds similar to mine. Let me learn something. Let me do something with that information. And so I feel like the more we can share our stories, the more we can advocate for ourselves and be better patients, and maybe not even be patients. That'd be the goal. But I just thought it was important that, we continue to have these conversations about gaslighting and how to advocate and more importantly, how to be happy and healthy.
I love it. So, two things really struck me there. Just advocating for yourself, like you said, right? Because no one else is really going to do it for you. Even our closest loved ones, they try, but we are our best advocate. And then taking what you have and sharing it with others and helping others see the same thing, which is what we're trying to do here. So thanks, Liz.
Absolutely.
Bree?
I completely agree with that. I feel like my entire life looks completely different than it did even a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago. Everything is so different. And sounds almost cliche to be like, I'm 40 and it's, best I've ever felt. But like, that's real. That's true. That happens. And I have this kind of like desperate need to convince other people that they really need to like do this too. Mm-hmm. And like to the point where I kind of have to like hold myself back, where it's like, don't start trying to diagnose people or something, because that's not helpful.
I hear you.
But like the idea of like, whoa, like you don't have to be like, your story doesn't have to be, my back hurts every day, or I never get any sleep, or I've gained all this weight and I don't know what to do with it or how to get it back off, or my doctor never listens to me, or I feel crappy all the time. That doesn't have to be anybody's story. There are options. And if it helps to share what I've experienced and somebody else can recognize that and then go, I don't know, maybe I'll give that a try and see what happens. Like that, I will probably never know, but it's really helpful to know that I've done my part to at least share what I experienced, and that it could be better for somebody else because of it.
I love it. And I know you will impact at least one person, probably more than that. I'm not saying the show has millions of listeners, but there's enough people who listen and are kind of in that demographic of, we're in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and, wondering what the heck we might do, even if lifestyle's dialed in, and maybe lifestyle's not dialed in. And if you know who you are, if that's the case, nobody needs to rub it in your face, right? Like we want to work both together and figure out the solution. So that is awesome. I mean, this has been really fun. And before we let everyone know how to connect with you, I do want to give a voice from someone else in our community. I mentioned this before we started recording. Her name is Stella, and she gave me permission to share her story. I want to share in her own words. So again, the warning we had before, this could be, a serious topic here. Quote, I had severe anemia written off as depression without any testing by the doctor who drugged and raped me. He was successfully sued for malpractice by others, but I didn't feel safe to come forward about it at that time, as I was only 19. The mental health misdiagnosis has never been removed from my file, so I've never received actual testing or investigation into any of my other health issues. It all gets written off as crazy patient syndrome. To save my life, I had to do over 10 years of research and watch my mom's diagnoses to find out what else was going on. She was gaslit about a thyroid issue for 2 decades until diagnosis. And doctors continue to refuse to order tests along the lines of my research, so there's no way to formally confirm or deny this. However, I brought myself back from being almost bedridden while doctors did nothing. I think it's important to speak up about how malicious predatory doctors can destroy a patient's ability to receive healthcare for their entire life. End quote. So it's a very different story from you, but there's a lot of similarities and obviously very heavy in what Stella's had to go through. Did any of you want to say anything about that? You don't have to. I can, close the episode here.
I don't have good words. That's
okay.
Absolutely horrific, but unfortunately not as rare as it should be.
I think it's so important that, we speak out, because it gives other people permission to speak out too. I think so many times we've seen this happen where women have an experience and they think, I'm the only one, I'll just keep it to myself and I'll live with this forever. But you never know how many people are out there, having the same lived experience that just don't quite have the courage to speak out. And so, my heart breaks for her that she had a provider that, used and abused and absolutely broke every oath that we make as healthcare providers. Inexcusable. But, I hope that she can find someone who will advocate for her and care for her and, help her get the things that she needs to really, again, get back to wellness, whatever that means for her.
What a courageous thing for her to share her story too.
Incredible.
Very much. Yeah. And she lives in a place where the infrastructure is difficult. She wanted to be on here, couldn't, but yeah, it's a whole spectrum. As we see, it's a spectrum. Everybody is different and the care we receive is different, but it's all the same principles behind it. And you two express beautifully how we can take back control of our health. So I do want to express, the deepest thanks and gratitude to both of you, Liz and Bree, for your bravery, vulnerability, because you are also sharing your, details of your life and your experiences. Just tell us how common it is. I mean, not just through yours, but also those that you've lived with and know, and Liz as a medical professional as well can give us that perspective. And it affects our well-being. It affects our health. That's why I wanted to bring on this show, because it affects everybody, even men listening, men supporting women. It happens to everybody. And so to our listeners, to our viewers who've had symptoms dismissed or your concerns minimized, or your intuition about your own body ignored by a medical professional, you are not alone at all. The stories here are just like a small sliver of this pervasive problem that we have in our industry. But, Liz and Bree showed us that there is power in self-advocacy and being the number one advocate for yourself, and trust your experience, seek second opinions, advocate with your appointments, and you can cancel on a doctor if you have to, as we heard from Bree. Maybe even, have people that go with you to appointments can be helpful too. And keep pushing for the care and answers you deserve. And if you're a healthcare professional listening, just like Liz, urge you to reflect on how you can create a safer, more validating environment for your patients to voice their concerns. So yes, change starts with what we had today with this conversation. And I think we could all work toward, a future where this doesn't happen again. That's what we want. So with that said, I know I've been talking a lot here. Liz, where do you want people to connect with you?
The easiest place to find me is on Instagram. I'm FitNurseLiz3.
All right. Instagram, FitNurseLiz3. I'll throw that in the show notes. And Bree, same question.
Instagram's probably the easiest place to find me as well. My whole little mini farm experiment up in the mountains is all on there. So you can find me on Instagram at Modern Mountain Homestead.
At Modern Mountain Homestead. I'll put that in as well. Any final thoughts? I want to give you guys the last word if you have anything else you want to say.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And Bree, I thank you so much for sharing your experience. And I just got so much out of this conversation that I hope it helps someone else. One person would be more than enough.
Awesome. I'll echo that. It's really great to be with this group. It's such a fun group. I'm glad we have a whole collaboration of nerds. Makes me happy. But just truly for anybody out there who listens, it's okay to advocate for yourself. It's okay to make your own decisions here. And I really, really hope that you are encouraged to do what's best for you.
Well said. I had a blast. So you guys are awesome. I had so much fun. This is one of the most favorite interviews I've ever done. And so I hope the listeners and viewers felt the same. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Wits and Weights. If you found value in today's episode and know someone else who's looking to level up their wits or weights, please take a moment to share this episode with them. And make sure to hit the follow button in your podcast platform right now to catch the next episode. Until then, stay strong. Hey, before you go, I want to let you know about a free resource I have. They are free guides on everything from fat loss to eating out to building muscle to managing hunger to figuring out the best macros for you and more being added all the time. You want to get the most out of these podcasts and your time to look and feel your best, and these free guides will give you a quick and easy way to know what to do. If you want to get your hands on these completely free guides, you can head over to witsandweights.com/free. That's witsandweights.com/free to get your free guides and level up your results today.